time on this. We'll go out again to shared screen. And thanks, guys, for hanging out. Let's look at this. There are two docs I have, and I'm going to bring them up. So I'm going to bring up sort of the more sloppy one first. This one, yeah. So what happened here was fine. I mean, overall, I'm going to look at it. We'll see. We have a link, we have a definition of his objective, but it's kind of compiled all in here, and then he goes into quotes and how he's going to analyze the quotes. So it's okay because he wanted to be more in a flow pattern. He didn't really want to do it in bullets. He said, Dr. Stavenhagen, can I just say, here's his objective and project, here's the genre, and here maybe is even a brief summary. He wanted to do more synopsis. He did get a little bit into methods here. It's very long, uses factual evidence. Could use a little more definition as to what you mean by factual evidence, just a little more so we could know what's going on. Took a quote. The authors found that greenhouse gas emissions continue at the current rate, will warm up as much as 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. And then he says, I found it very shocking, heavily influenced my decision for choosing this topic. I think the quote will be very useful because it conveys a lot of information in one sentence. It talks about what will happen and the implications. So it's good that he's drawing out the implication and possibly how he might use it. And it's certainly a data point. So in this case, it's a very interesting point as to how notes work. If notes have, the 5 quotes have opinions, it'll allow you a little bit more commentary to kind of push back and agree or disagree. If they're just facts, it might be very brief as to what you're going to have as a comment. You're going to say, I'm going to just position this fact early in the paper to establish the problem. That's probably all you're going to do. Or you're going to say, I'm going to use this as a buttress for me to be able to make the case for XYZ argument. And that's sometimes what you do. I will say that if you can push to find opinionated quotes, great. But again, it depends on your field. If you're in humanities and social sciences and even hard sciences, it's mostly data. So it's not, it's not a lot of positioning of the data, but still look for it because believe it or not, a lot of articles, even in science, will have it implied, very implicit argument. All right, let's go back here. This is more kind of, if you will, looking the way it will look for most y'all. Author, keywords, author's project is, very matter of fact in paragraph, spread awareness of how the press interacts with campus protests. He goes a little more specific. What's the difference between a project and a thesis? A project is what the author wants you to do upon reading the article. I mean, what are they really trying to get you to do or act upon? Thesis is more maybe a central argument. And as you guys, again, we go from high school to college, as Ava talked about. It just gets more free. But even so, I know you guys are seniors. The thesis, even, right? Is there one thesis in a work? And the answer is no. Oftentimes there's not. There's just a person puzzling through 3 or 4 questions, an assemblage of which at least ties to a project, but not even necessarily a real clear thesis. So there's an assemblage of 2 or 3 major points. But we'll still dive for it. I did not require the thesis, but this person felt like they wanted to get it in. That's cool. We are identifying as an article in a journal. We'll ask for that. The format is an interview with a group of people. That's helpful. Again, just this front end sometimes is a little more for me, just so for us to have a conversation to make sure I know what kind of article we're looking at. I mean, because that'll help me understand how you might position it. I don't get my fingers in the pie, guys. Don't worry. I'm like hovering over you as you're writing your your research essay. But I am in process, meaning it just becomes a tool for us to be able to have conversations and conferences. All right. Quotes, facts. The first fact I thought was key from the source was in the background intro type section when journalists were blocked from covering the protests encampment. The media's attention and narrative shifted from what the protest was about to the rights of journalists to report. I think that brings up an interesting debate about where protesters' rights to privacy end if they're engaged in public protests. Let me look at that because that's pretty interesting. So hopefully you can see this. And I think it also shows that there is not one correct answer to the debate. It shapes my research because in my own experience, press tried to ask a lot of personal questions about the people protesting. It brings up a question about whose First Amendment rights get priority, the protesters or the press? And that may shape my research going forward. Really interesting thinking going on here, right? You immediately feel like, okay, we're pushing some thought. And did a great job. He actually put a podcast together on this and the protests at SU. Higher education was never meant for people of color. That's clear in the policies and practices we experience today. very provocative quote, right? I don't think I can put into my own words in a way that is more meaningful than this. It's clear, concise, and powerful, sums up realities of institutional racism, likely going to frame a large part of my argument as to where he wants to put it, if you will, and how he wants to position the quote. The only thing that might add is unpacking the quote in terms of context. Where did it come? Because this is such a provocative quote. I almost want to know what the context is. And again, see, now we're in the land of, oh, Dr. Stavenheim, do I have to explain it for you? Because I'll get it to you in the paper, you know? And I have to say, like, I got to go a little both and, guys. Play back with me, because I have to grade this as a separate unit, right? It's a prep unit. And in other words, I know a lot of us might extrapolate and go in more depth later, and that's awesome. And I will mostly trust you, but I still have to grade what's on the paper. So give me a little bit, just a smidgen more here, right? As to the context, I think could help. Let's look at one more and then we're done, guys. The next line was also a powerful one. It's not just students' responsibility, it's the faculty too. So here we're getting a little context just by dropping in, and you did give me the very next line. Mizu held a teach-in where Black faculty members shared their experiences with racial inequality, and then student and faculty got to ask questions. That's the kind of conversation we should be encouraging. And then goes into saying, okay, there's a quote from a prof, echoes the statements of one of the profs at Syracuse University that he had talked to. He could have made that more explicit here, but I knew that changing the culture on campus requires students and faculty to make changes and start conversations that would encourage action. This may not directly influence my research question, but it's an important way to address the racial bias issues on campus and may lead to success. Okay, couple things here I want to say. Some of us would feel like, wow, this is a lot of kind of extrapolation from a quote, you know, like 5-6 sentences per quote I have to give you feedback on. Not necessarily. I've had people bullet effectively, like, you know, they plunk the quote down and they just bullet 4 quick takes on it, or 3 quick takes. And even in, I can accept fragments, you know, and bullet phrasing. I don't have to have full sentences in the response to the quote. I look at it as a means to make sure I have enough understanding of what you're extrapolating from the quote. That's good enough. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I mean, slightly paraphrasing what the quote's saying, then thinking about how it might apply. Most people do that. And then the third is, you know, a little bit of interactivity. I agree, I disagree, or I find this fascinating. It relates to this other quote that I have. It's just showing a little bit of processing. You're starting to do laundry, you know, the hand laundry, if you will, of doing it, thinking it through, like the old school wash burn, where you got that thing and you're just taking your shirt up against it and, you know, getting out the stains. It's kind of what we're talking about. All right, I'm going to end.